Alright, so this is going to be a little bit of a different video, more of a review video because I boneheadedly lost all of my footage of the repair and diagnosis on this, and I'll explain that in a moment. But this is a Wills Gardner 25-inch U5000 that came off of, well, off a tube that came out of a Mortal Kombat 4. And this belonged to Chris over at Killer Arcade Games, and when he acquired this, it was not working. He turned it on and it was just ticking, tick, 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 which is indicative of a shorted HOT. So he called over our friend JoJo from the Wicked Arcade, and they troubleshot this, and they went ahead and replaced the HOT, turned it on, and it shorted immediately. It was tick, tick, tick. So at that point, they did a new flyback, a cap kit. I told them to specifically reflow some things. They reflowed everything I told them to. Everything passed visual inspection, and they did all the stuff that they thought they needed to do and everything that I suggested, and they turned it on after replacing the HOT again, and it started ticking again, and HOT was dead again. So at that point, they kind of threw their hands up and said, we really don't know what to do from this point. So I said, okay, send me the chassis, and I'll send you an already rebuilt, repaired, working one as a replacement, and to get you up and going. Send me this one in exchange, and I'll get this one fixed later. So later is now upon us, and I have the original one here that was not working, and the one that I sent Chris fired up and works just fine, although he's got a bad picture tube and a bad yoke. At some point in the past, the cabinet was dropped severely. This is my hypothesis. The cabinet was dropped or mishandled severely, and his yoke assembly is broken. So all this plastic part here that has the ring and the secure point, anchor point, mount point to the neck of the tube, this whole plastic piece is broken off of the yoke. The yoke is moving around on the neck independently of this. And the only way that can really happen, or I've ever seen that happen, is on a high hour tube that has a lot of heat in this area. When the cabinet gets slammed down or mishandled, this can actually break off of the plastic part. So he has to somehow epoxy this all back together after getting it adjusted properly. And then he has to figure out what he's going to do from that point, because he's got the yoke on there somewhat adjusted, and then the shadow mask on the tube is all messed up. So he's got a bad shadow mask on his tube and a bad yoke assembly. That tube and yoke is done. So unfortunately, he's probably not going to be able to use that. It might work for now, but it doesn't look very good. So there's a little bit of backstory on that. So I sent him a chassis to get that monitor going, and he didn't figure any of that out until after that point. But this is the one that he originally had on that tube that it was mishandled, and it was shorting HOTs. Now this had been previously worked on by somebody, Atlas Electronics, back in December 6th of 2014. And I think they're the ones that did all this stuff because the IC101, the switch mode power supply chip, is in a socket. U701 is in a socket. So I think that this was, and R104 is some type of weird different ceramic resistor here, and it reads 10,000 ohms, so it's 10K ohms, so it's correct. But I don't know what the wattage is, but they've got a different, I've never seen this style of resistor in here for the ceramic resistor for R104. So, I mean, it works, so I'm not going to worry about it, but that's an oddity as well. The two sockets, someone's done some strategic reflowing. I've never seen, they drilled a hole in the side of the heatsink here to mount the vertical sweep mod, even though there's a hole right here. There's a hole right there that you can mount it to. They drilled a hole in the heatsink and put it right there. And it was loose when I got it, and it's possible that the wire here was touching the frame. That wasn't good, so I tightened this up so it's now secure. Someone changed out the shutdown pot, the B plus pot. The glue's been broken off and adjusted on that. So I don't know exactly how much JoJo and Chris did for troubleshooting this, but I don't imagine them putting the sockets in or changing out the shutdown pot. Or breaking the glue loose on the B plus pot. I don't know, but it doesn't ultimately matter. This has been reworked by a couple of different people. So the long story long here is that the HOT is shorting out. So I did a very good visual inspection, and I noticed that a lot of the caps had popped pads. None of the solder joints and none of the traces were cracked or broken. But I'd say probably about 65–70% of the caps all had pads that were broken off of the board, and you could wiggle the cap around. I had to repair The solder joints on this cap and this cap here, that's by the TP202B plus test point. A number of caps were leaning about 45 degrees and things like that. So just the visual stuff that I like to OCD about, I got all that done. But I didn't notice anything that was visually wrong. There were no broken, cracked joints. There were no cracks in the board. There were no missing components. Everything was actually okay, but the HOT itself was shorted. Except for one thing, and I've been stalling on that because I've never seen it happen before, and I don't know if it's the cause. And I'm going to go over it at the end here. I did actually record a part at the end of the previous video attempt that explains and goes over what I think the problem was. It didn't really pan out, but you'll see what I mean. So the video selection header pins are a very extreme common issue on these to cause problems. You can see that there is evidence of burnage here on the pins, as well as the connection points here. But I took all this apart and used my fiberglass pen and cleaned all the header pins off. And then I took the sockets out of removed the sockets from the connector, cleaned up the pins on those and the sockets, and then put this back in here. So all of the normal rework I do on the U5000 has been done. I cleaned up and reflowed all of the neck transistors and the drive resistors, and I did all that stuff. So, I mean, this wasn't really that bad, so to speak, but I got all the reflow and rework done on the neck board, reflow and rework done on the main board, and the only thing that I found that could possibly have been causing this was a bad, two solder pins, or 2 pins on the U701 chip were shorted together. So if we turn this over and zoom in here, there is a dedicated ground, and I'll see if I can insert a picture from the first 3 minutes, because I found this in the first 3 minutes. Whenever I get these chassis, I do a complete total visual inspection. It's absolutely critical that you do a really good comprehensive visual inspection on these before you really do any work, because you don't want to waste time chasing down something that's caused by something like this. So if we look here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these 2 pins right here, 1, 2, 3. Let's get something better to point with here. Here we go. All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pin 4 here is a dedicated ground. It goes right to this ground plane here. And then right next to it is our vertical output pin, our vertical drive pin, and those 2 were shorted together. Now what's interesting is that if you look at the schematic, and you'll see at the end of the video here, this is a dedicated ground, this is a vertical drive pin. It's actually pin 14 and 15 on the chip. So pin 14 is a dedicated ground, and pin 15 is the vertical drive output, but we don't need that pin. That pin goes nowhere. There's no trace for it, because we have our own vertical output IC right here, the vertical IC. So it does not use this U701 for the vertical drive. So pin 15 here has no output. It doesn't have a trace to it. There's no connection. But if you ground those 2 together, internally, I don't know what it would do to the chip. So I don't know if this was the cause of our HOT being shorted. So we'll go over that later. But I also want to mention that whenever you have a U2000 or a U5000 that is shorting HOTs, almost exclusively it's caused by one of 2 things or both. Right here we have R765 right here, and R760 is right behind it. So R760 and R765. These are only exclusively used on the U2000 and the U5000. The K7400 and the K7500 do not have these populated in the board. So if you have a 2000 or a 5000 that's shorting HOTs, it's almost always one of these 2 resistors are either out of tolerance or open completely, and that takes out the HOT. But in this instance, these are okay, but there's evidence of these being replaced. So I think the previous person trying to get this fixed knew that and replaced these 2 resistors and still couldn't figure out the problem, because these aren't factory resistors. These have obviously been replaced. This one is supposed to be 33k ohm, and this one's supposed to be between 100 and 500 ohms. So R760 should be between 100 and 500 ohms, and this one should be about 33k ohm. And the difference, I've seen them up between 33 to 39k ohm on R765. But the reason that they have such a wide range is because it depends on the revision of the board. So this is what's labeled as an I, and it looks like somebody has white outed the legs of the E and written them back in. I can't tell if this is an I or an E or maybe an H. I think this might have been an H that somebody white outed the half of the H and then put 3 little lines for E. That just looks so weird like that. But depending on the reversion or revision of the main board, you can have differences in the readings of 765 and 760. But these both read okay. This was 33 k ohm and this was 505 ohms. 33 k ohm for 765 and 505 ohms for our 760. So those weren't the problem. So these 3688s are known to be unreliable. And you can even see how how it's discolored and heated in this area here, right here, compared to the rest of it. So I don't like to use these. Whenever the HOT goes out on one of these, I just grab the FJL 6920 and I put in an FJL 6920 and I really never look back and I never have a problem. So this is working perfectly. So you can use logic and reasoning to determine that if there was something wrong with this chassis that was directly causing the HOT to short out, that it would short out the FGL 6920 as well. These are a lot beefier and much more robust. I've mentioned it ad nauseum in a bunch of other videos. But if there was something shorted or open or a bad flyback or something wrong with this setup that was taking out the HOT, it would also absolutely take out the 6920, and it doesn't. I put this in here after going over painstakingly everything on the chassis, finding nothing wrong with it except that pins 14 and 15 shorted together on the U701. I put this in here and it fired up and it works fine. So I went through and did a lot of strategic reflow and repairing of previous repairs, fixing loose solder pads and things like that. I still need to go through and clean up. The flyback was replaced, so I need to go through and clean up all the flux and all the flux on the rest of the board and give it a nice cleaning. I still have to do all that. I never really show any of that. I do all that on all the chassis. I never actually, I think I've shown that, but rest assured I do all that before I put it back on the parts pile and ready to go. So I also had to replace the jumper, the W159 jumper right here that we removed for our power supply testing for the light bulb test. I have a dedicated video on that. If you want to know how to do the light bulb test, I'll put a link down in the description for that video. But this jumper here that we lift out to do the testing for the light bulb was all kind of mangled and twisted and whatnot. So I just used a capacitor leg to replace it so it's nice and straight again. But again, I found nothing wrong with this in any way, shape, or form except those pins 14 and 15. I think, yeah, 13 is... I forget what 13 is, but I think it's 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. 14 and 15 were shorted together. And you'll see at the end here, I took a picture before, actually a screen capture. So I recorded the first 3 minutes of troubleshooting and inspection, and I found that problem. And I took a screen capture from that 3-minute video, and I'm using that here. So you'll see how it was originally when I found it like that here shortly. But otherwise, everything works fine. B plus is I adjusted to 117. I got the shutdown pot adjusted to the proper 0.1 volts DC. For that, there is a test point right here, TP201. There's a test point right there. You hook your meter right there and you adjust the shutdown pot to read 0.1 volts DC. And that's where you want to set that to. It was adjusted I had to turn about a quarter turn to get it right because it wasn't adjusted properly. Whoever replaced it didn't adjust it properly. So I do all that stuff every time on all these. I might not show it all, but I always do it. So everything's been reflowed and adjusted and reworked and fixed and cleaned and put back together. And this is now a 100% operational chassis that was blowing the HOT, and there was nothing wrong with it other than pins 14 and 15 on the U701 was shorted together, which I don't know if that was a cause or not. And I just think that we had a bad or... not counterfeit, because these work, but I just don't trust these replacement 3688s because I can count on probably 2 hands the number of times I've had a chassis that was just taking out HOT after HOT after HOT, and I could not find the problem, pulling my hair out what's left of it. And I finally just out of desperation threw in a 6920 and it worked fine forever after that. So if you got a shorting HOT and you can't find any fault physical, I would just put a 6920 in there and you'll probably be just fine. Anyway, so there's an explanation. Sorry I don't have any actual troubleshooting footage, but let me cut to what I found with this U701, and that'll be about it. So yeah, this was, there was really nothing wrong with this except for that 14-15 shorted together. Now, I will say that the flyback was faulty. The replacement flyback that was faulty, or that was in here, was faulty. This is a brand new one that I just got from a new batch from Peter at Arcade Parts and Repair, and I'm going to use this for a 24-hour testing burn-in on these, because if you notice here, this one has a gray wire for the G2, and this is the flyback that was originally on this chassis when I got sent up here from Chris. There's a couple oddities about this, is that it has an orange wire for the G2, and the anode wire, actually this is the second anode. They refer to this as the second anode wire that runs up here to the cup. The wire and the shielding is like 3 times as thick as this one. I don't know if you'll be able to tell, but look how much thicker this one is compared to this. This is a much older flyback. Now it's the same part number. It's U5000X0624, and then we have, I don't know if we'll be able to see that, 053, focus on that, 053X062401. So it's the same part number, however, it's vastly different. This one is very different from this one. And part of, I'm really, really sad about this footage not being out there or available, because I was doing some testing on this, powering it up. And after about, I'd say 30 seconds of it actually running with this FJL 6920, I got the B plus dropped to 70 volts, started making a hissing noise, and then pop. And this thing shot all of its smoke out. Right, you can even see the trail here. Right there, it popped a little pinhole and all of its magic smoke came out. So I'm super disappointed I don't have footage of that. Just the one time that I turn something on and go, okay, let's see if it works, power it up, and then the one time that happens, I don't have footage of it. But so this is the flyback that JoJo and Chris put on the chassis, and it lasted about 30 seconds after I got it running. So I don't know if it was just from a bad batch, but Peter just sent me 3 giant boxes of flybacks to test. This is one of them, so I'm going to run this for 24 hours and make sure it works. But yeah, again, long story long here is that after all this previous work and everything, it came down to simply, I think we had just a weak or bad HOT. The 6920 went in there and no problem. Of course, after removing that solder bridge. So all right, enough chatting. Let me cut to the chase here at the end, where I talk about that solder bridge, and you'll see it. The picture you see from the screen capture of the video is how it exactly was when I received it, and we'll discuss things like that and what those pins do and all that. So let's cut to that. Otherwise, I appreciate it. Sorry I lost the footage, but I wanted to at least talk about this and explain it and talk about what to look for, and if you have a shorting HOT, things like that. And I got a number of other U5000 videos that go into more detail about cleaning, and especially this connector and stuff like that. So thanks again. I'll cut to that, and I appreciate it, and we'll catch you next time. Well, I figured I'd go ahead and at least show it operating. I was going to cut right to the explanation of the U701 shorted pins, but I thought, well, let's not rob you of how good this looks. So basically, I have the chassis here because I'm using, this is the tube that a couple videos back that I stole out of the television, the tube swap TV video a few videos back, and I wanted to see how well this operated and looked on that tube, so I have to use this little foam protector here for the chassis to sit on, because these don't fit in the K7000 frame that I used for that swap. So I have this set up for medium res. I'm not going to test it on 25. I did test it for 25 on a U5000 tube, and it does work perfectly. So this chassis is 100% operational. There's nothing wrong with it, but I'm not going to test the 25 kilohertz because I don't want to run that on this standard res yoke here. That's pretty much a Henrex Polo setup. So, all right, anyway. So yeah, I didn't want to rob you of how well this looks. So I have this up and running here, and yeah, it's just amazing. So if we start,
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is our
it's unbelievably crisp and clear. So that's mostly the tube, of course, but yeah, it looks fantastic. So not very bright, crisp. The colors are great. Actually, if anything, it's a bit too dark. Yeah, that's a bit better. So yeah, it's fantastic. perfect square image, the whole 9 yards. So I mean, this will support a U5000 as well. Just go in the menu to shut it up. But yeah, I mean, obviously I have to, like I say, I have to run this for 24 hours straight to make sure that that doesn't explode like the other one did as part of my testing for Peter. So I'm going to use this to let it run. And that'll also burn in the fact of whether or not this will support a U5000 on standard res. So anyway, yeah, it does operate and work, and it looks fantastic. So let me cut away to explanation on this, and then we'll finish up this video. All right, gang, so here we have a screen capture from the video, and you can clearly see these two pins are dead shorted together. Now, if we look, this is a big ground pathway, big ground trace here, and you can kind of see right here, there is part of that trace going to this pin. So this is a ground, an actual hard ground off the trace. And the pin right next to it is shorted to it. So it's 1, 2, 3, and then a ground, and the pin next to it. So if we go to the pinout, here is the dedicated ground right here. So if we go 1, 2, 3, there's a dedicated ground and the pin next to it. So pin 14 and 15 are shorted together. Now 15 is the vertical drive output. If we look at the actual schematic, pin 15 is no connection. It doesn't go anywhere. It's not hooked up to anything. If you go back to the capture here, you can see pin 15, there's no trace. This has a trace, this has a trace, trace. 15 goes nowhere. It's not hooked up to ground, only this pin is, pin 14. So these two being shorted together, I don't know if that would cause our problem, because we don't have, the U701 has the vertical drive output ability, but if we go to the actual schematic here, we can see that TDA 1771, U601 is our actual vertical IC. So we don't use the 7850 for the vertical output. So that's why pin 15 has no connection. So I don't know what having those two pins would do. It doesn't appear to me that that would cause the HOT to get shorted, but I don't know. Maybe somebody else out there who's smarter than me can chime in and let me know, or let all of us know, if that would have anything to do with the HOT going out. I just simply think that it was just some faulty HOTs. I think the original HOT went out and someone tried their darndest to get it going, and they were just putting in insufficient HOTs or a bad batch of HOTs. I mean, it happens. I'm not a fan of the 3688s. Like I say, I've said many times and preached it, oh, now I just lost it. The FJL 6920. It's been a long day. Like I say, I was at the Chiefs championship game against the Bengals yesterday, and it was freezing cold, and I couldn't feel my fingers and toes, and I didn't want it to go to overtime, and that last field goal was, a nice hurrah, and it took us an hour to get out of the parking lot, and somebody dumped their hot coals on the grass in the parking lot and caught the parking lot on fire, and it was it was just I didn't get home till 2 in the morning. It was a fiasco. So I'm still trying to recover and recuperate from the whole experience from yesterday. FJL 6920. Okay, that's the point of that. So, I love those because I put it in there and it operates and runs. If something was wrong with the chassis that was shorting out the HOT, it would short out the 6920 also. If you had a bad R760 or 765 or something else on the chassis that was shorted, that was bad, a bad transistor somewhere that was taking the HOT out, it would take out the 6920 also, and it's not. So I just think it's a simple fact of the replacement HOT. The original HOT died from something wrong with the chassis, and a new flyback and cap kit and reflow whatnot fixed it. But because they had the bad HOTs, they couldn't get it running again. So I put the 6920 in there, and it fired right up. So anyway, this is pretty much inconclusive. I was hoping there'd be some type of smoking gun, like, oh, the horizontal oscillation circuit is shorted, no wonder. But nope, the horizontal oscillation circuit is actually, let's see, horizontal power supply, drive pulse widths. Okay, so that's all 11, 12, and 13. But it's 14 and 15 that are shorted together. 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. 11, 12, 13, no, it's 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. The ground, the first three pins, and then the ground, and 15. So, yeah, inconclusive, unfortunately. Someone can chime in if they know more than I do about it, but that's about it. So, yeah, I'll do all the other work off camera. We'll get it nice and factory fresh. I'll put it back in the pile to replace the one I sent the owner of this one to get them up and going. And, yeah, I appreciate you watching. Hopefully you learned something. Like, share, and subscribe. and we'll see you next time.